Hello, Wonderhussy here, way up in Northern California at beautiful Shasta Lake. This ginormous man-made lake has a 4.5 million acre-foot capacity, a 365-mile-long shoreline, and was created in 1945 by damming the Sacramento River with the Shasta Dam, which is the biggest dam in California. The building of Shasta Dam ended up creating a bunch of irrigation opportunities for the rest of California, but the creation of Shasta Lake ended up flooding a bunch of mining towns, the largest of which was a place called Kennett. Kennett was a copper mining town, well, really a city, that had been around since the 1860s. I guess the copper that was mined here was extremely pure, so times were good. At one time, there were 10,000 people living here, with stores, a post office, an opera house, and something like 40 saloons, including one called The Diamond that was 4 stories high and was considered the nicest place between San Francisco and Portland. I mean, this place was supposed to have been really fancy, with Tiffany lamps and frescoes of naked women on the ceiling and scantily clad women pouring shots of their own locally distilled and bottled brand of whiskey. I can only imagine the parties they had there. But after the price of metals went down after World War I was over, the mines closed and the town eventually dried up to the point where by 1931, there weren't even enough people living there anymore to be incorporated as a city. So when the federal government decided to build the Shasta Dam in 1935, it wasn't too difficult to buy out the remaining townsfolk, and by the 1940s, the remains of Kennett were completely flooded under 400 feet of water. Imagine an opera house and that amazing 4-story saloon buried at the bottom of this lake. I wonder if you can scuba dive to it. Actually, I guess during the worst part of the drought, I mean, you can see how there's kind of like a bathtub ring around the edge of the lake. You can see the level's lower than it was at its maximum capacity. But at the lowest level of the drought, supposedly you could see some of the ruins of Kennett poking out above the waterline. Kind of like that other ghost town I made a video about, St. Thomas out at Lake Mead, that's completely above water now because Lake Mead is so low and you can actually just walk around through it. Well, it's funny because I actually did a houseboat trip out here on Lake Shasta a few summers ago when the drought was still, I think, at its worst. And while I didn't know anything about Kennett back then, but I didn't see any ruins poking out of the water. Anyway, I guess because of the wet winter we had last year, the lake level is back up high enough to where we won't be able to see anything poking up out of Lake Shasta today. So why am I here if you can't see anything anymore? Well, the whole reason I'm up here in Northern California in the first place is I came up to go to my grandma's 90th birthday party. That's right, my mom's mom just turned 90 last Sunday, went to her party, had a great time, and while I was there, I was talking to one of my aunts, my mom's sister, who's been doing a bunch of genealogy research. Okay, my mom's maiden name is Perryman, and so my aunt researched the Perryman family history and found out that my great-great-grandfather came over to California from Cornwall, England, back in the 1860s, and he was a miner. Imagine that. All these videos I've been making at all these mining towns over the years, and I finally learned that I have a personal family connection to mining. So yeah, I guess my great-great-grandfather was this guy named Thomas Perryman, who was born in 1843 and worked in the tin mines in a town called St. Austell, Cornwall, or St. Austell, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it. Anyway, people had been working the mines in Cornwall since the days of the Roman Empire. So by the 1860s, they were pretty much tapped out, and the locals had to go elsewhere to find work. Between 1860 and 1900, 250,000 Cornish people ended up emigrating in search of work. And a lot of them ended up going to America. Remember, this was the 1860s. Gold had been discovered in California, and while the initial gold rush was in 1849, people were still flocking to California. And back then, you could afford to move to California with just a shovel and a dream. Anyway, I guess my great-great-grandfather, Thomas Perryman, sailed from Liverpool to Ellis Island on a ship called the City of New York in 1866 and headed west. And I'm not sure how he got to California. My aunt didn't have any travel records in the research she did. The Transcontinental Railroad wasn't completed until, I think, 1869. And even if there was a railroad, a poor Cornish miner probably wouldn't have been able to afford it. So I don't know if he ended up taking a ship all the way down around the bottom of South America to San Francisco, or if he just walked across the country like all them good time pioneers. Imagine that, after all these videos I've made about the Donner Party, and as much as I'm always blathering on about pioneer history, it's interesting to think that my own ancestor might have made that same trip. Well, however he got there, by 1871, my great-great-grandfather Thomas had gotten his American citizenship. And I guess back in those days, they had something called derivative citizenship, to where your wife and children also became citizens automatically when you did. Imagine that happening today. I'm not even going to go there. I can hear Tucker Carlson ranting about it already. But in any event, it was good for me because that meant that my great-great-grandfather Thomas could go back and get my great-great-grandmother Eliza and bring her to California with him. They had gotten married in 1862, and they already had one kid, but times were so tough in Cornwall that my great-great-grandfather had to leave them behind to go looking for work in another country just to support them. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Anyway, sometime around 1873, Thomas Perryman went back to Cornwall to get his wife and son and convince all his brothers to come back to California with him too. And while he was back there, he and Eliza had another son, my great-grandfather William Perryman, who was born in 1874. That's my great-grandfather. Now, unfortunately, I guess my aunt wasn't able to find any photos of my great-great-grandfather Thomas or my great-great-grandmother Eliza. They were poor and basically illiterate. In fact, you can see where he signed his citizenship form with an X, because I don't think he could even write his own name. Anyway, back in those days, you had to have money to get your picture taken, so unfortunately, we'll never know what Thomas Sr. or Eliza looked like. Anyway, after the birth of my great-grandfather William, the whole family set sail, I guess, from Liverpool to New York, and then, well, again, I really wish I knew how they got to California. By this time, 1874-75, the railroad was finished, so maybe they were able to take that. Again, we might never know. But what we do know is that they ended up settling in Northern California, living and working in various gold mining camps like Sierra City, which is up in the mountains sort of northwest of Lake Tahoe. My aunt found this awesome old census form, which I think is absolutely fascinating. And you can see their names right there under Sim Ah from China. There's my great-great-grandfather Thomas and my great-great-grandmother Eliza. But eventually they left Sierra City and moved to, you guessed it, Kennett. That's right, my great-great-grandfather and great-great-grandmother and great-grandfather William all lived in a house in a little town under about 400 feet of water back yonder somewhere. I wonder if they ever hung out at the Diamond Saloon. Anyway, sadly, my great-great-grandfather Thomas ended up dying pretty young, at age 52, of what they called miner's consumption back then, which I think was bronchitis, and was probably a pretty common cause of death for guys who spent their lives working underground, breathing in stuffy, dusty mine air. And my great-great-grandmother Eliza died not long after him. Well, I guess because my great-great-grandfather was some kind of higher up or at least well-respected guy in the miners' union, the union saw to it that he got a proper burial in the big city, Redding. Okay, Redding, California is a much bigger city, about 15 miles from here, and it is not covered by 400 feet of water. In fact, you can still go there today. People live there. In fact, I spent the night there myself last night. Go easy on me. It was too cold to camp. I mean, look at the snow on them mountains. Anyway, because Redding is still a thriving city today, I guess you can still go to the cemetery and see the grave of my great-great-grandfather Thomas still standing. At least my aunt had a photo of it, so I'm guessing it's still standing. But my aunt wasn't able to find out where my great-great-grandmother was buried. Okay, remember, Eliza died not long after Thomas, and if Thomas was held in such high regard by the miners' union, well, you think they would have seen to it that his beloved wife was buried nearby, if not right next to him. But we don't know. And so when I was at my grandma's birthday party, my aunt asked me if I'd be willing to go up to Redding and look for her grave. And so that's why I'm standing here at the side of Shasta Lake. I've come all the way up here to the land of my ancestors to look for the grave of my great-great-grandmother, Eliza. Okay, I have no idea where in this cemetery my great-great-grandfather is buried. So I guess I just need to drive around and look for the oldest part of the cemetery. Oh, I just realized I didn't bring flowers or anything to leave on his grave. I'm a terrible great-great-granddaughter. Okay, well, this section here where I first drove in looks pretty old-timey. I'm gonna park right here and just get out and look around on foot. Okay, I know his grave wasn't anything as fancy as this, but these are kind of in the right time period. You know, this 1855, 1845. So I feel like I'm probably in the right area. Now, I know from the photo that my aunt had what his grave looks like, and it's kind of one of those obelisk looking ones like that one there. So let's go check that one out. Man, this is especially interesting to me because I'm looking for the grave of my great-great-grandmother as well, and her name was Eliza, which is my sister's name, Eliza. Not that common of a name anymore, but back in the day, I guess it was more common. So it's kind of a cool personal connection for me. Little known fact, I have an ancestor on my dad's side of the family named Sarah Jane, and she, which is my name, it was shocker, my birth name wasn't Wonderhussy, I'm Sarah Jane. Anyway, my ancestor Sarah Jane was kind of controversial because this was back in Kentucky in like the 1860s, and she married a Jewish man named Solomon Klein. Now, back in those days, and probably even still in some parts today, you know, a Gentile marrying a Jew, woo, it was a big friggin' deal. Okay, unfortunately, this is not my great-great-grandfather's grave. That's Beatrice Latimer, who died in 1919, age 63. But his grave looks like that, so, oh gosh. I guess I'm just gonna have to walk all over this dang graveyard looking at these obelisks until I find it. Marion Baker. Henry Gumeggs. Oh gosh, yikes, look. Here's a freshie. I feel slightly morbid bumbling around this graveyard, but I gotta find my great-great-grandfather and my great-great-grandmother's graves. Maybe I should go look inside the cemetery office and see if they have some kind of directory. Oh, right on. There's like a woman working here who said she would go look up where his grave is. So I gave her his name, and she went back into the vault to look at the records. So I'm just gonna stay here in the lobby and wait and see what she turns up. Wow, far out. Look at this. That lady in there was so cool. She not only found his grave for me, but look at that. There's Eliza Perryman buried right next to him. So I feel like I should be able to find this with no problem at all now, especially considering she gave me a map leading right to the treasure. Section 12. Let's go. Okay, I guess I'm almost there. Wow, I really do feel like a treasure hunter with this map. Or maybe more like a tomb raider, searching for the mysteries of the long-departed miners of Kennett and their long-suffering miners' wives. I mean, this poor Eliza. I can't imagine she had an easy life. I mean, that's not to say that Thomas did. First of all, just even sailing across the ocean back then must have been pretty tough in and of itself. And he sailed back and forth at least twice. But then she had to raise kids in these mine camps. And I can't imagine that it was a very easy life. In fact, she kept on cranking out kids into her 40s. I think she had her last child in her early 40s. And, well, unfortunately, that means the last kid, and I don't remember the name of the last kid she had, but I think it was a boy, was probably pretty young when his mom died. You know, he was an orphan. His dad and his mom both died, I think, within a year. Anyway, I better pay attention or I'll never find this grave. Okay, that circle is right there where I parked. So that means his grave is up here and over there. Oh no, look. Charlie G, or C, died March 8th, 1866, age 8 years, 4 months. Oh no, it's so sad how they put the little lambs on the kids' graves. Poor little Charlie, poor lost lamb. Cheer up, Charlie, don't be afraid. Oh, I gotta be respectful. I'm in a cemetery. Okay, back to looking. Where is this dang grave? Oh gosh, look at this one. It's so fancy with these theatrical drapery and these tassels. I guess that's supposed to indicate that it was curtains for poor DJ Gwynn. Oh no, look at this guy. Barry John Wise. Born in 68, died in 87. He was only 21 years old. He looks like he was a lot of fun. Think about that. Died in 87. He's got that 80s hairdo. You know, business in the front, party in the back. That Jack Daniels t-shirt. With a shirt like that, I'll bet he was party in the front and party in the back. I bet he was party 24/7. I bet he listened to all that good 80s music like Judas Priest and Ozzy Osbourne. In fact, maybe that's how he died. Maybe he played a Black Sabbath album backwards. And it told him to go drive his car off a cliff into Shasta Lake. Oh my God, that's terrible. He might have just died on his way to the grocery store or something. Back to business, looking for this grave. Woohoo! My gosh, I found it. Or I should say, I found the grave of my great-great-grandfather. Look at that. Thomas Perryman, born June 26, 1843, died June 6th, 1894. Just like I said, although I thought he was 52 when he died. That makes it seem like he was only not even 51, only 50. Oh my gosh. Yikes. And then look, right next to him is the grave of Edward Yelland. Yelland was Eliza's maiden name, okay? So I guess Edward Yelland must have been like Eliza's brother. They were probably all friends. Remember I said when Thomas went back to Cornwall after he got his citizenship to go get his wife and kids, and he talked all his brothers into it. Well, he probably talked the whole town, as many guys as he could, like, come on, come to California with me. There's plenty of land. There's plenty of work. Anyway, I'll bet you anything Edward Yelland was Eliza's brother. born in 62, which was the year Eliza got married. So, much younger brother, I guess. I think she was 18 when she got married. And then he died in 1917. Native of England. Yep, that checks out. And then what's really interesting is, okay, I was looking around to see what else is written on Thomas Perryman's grave. And it looks like there was a really long inscription on the back, but it's so worn away. I mean, gosh, he died in 1894, so what is that? 130 years ago, yeah. 130 winters, 130 summers have pretty much worn away whatever this said. It was probably some long, fancy, flowery Victorian poem about mortality. You know how they used to do. But anyway, on the fourth side of this obelisk, which by the way, it is an obelisk, is the grave of Eliza Perryman. Or at least the memorial to Eliza Perryman. I don't know. I guess they used to just... Well, I mean, golly. It's pretty close quarters as it is. I mean, between Edward over here, Thomas over there. I mean, I guess Eliza could be buried in between the two of them. I mean, they were probably all good friends in life, and so I guess they might as well continue that party on into the afterlife. Three's company here. Anyway, Eliza Perryman died December 3rd, 1894. So when did he die? June 6th. So yeah, she only lived about 6 more months after he died. And then it says she died age 49 years, 9 months, 15 days. Gosh, she wasn't even 50 years old. I told you, life in these mining camps was rough. I mean, we can complain all we want about how miserable life is today and kids on these little devices and nobody wants to work, but, well, I guess we get to live longer. I don't know, maybe it was better to live a shorter life and work an honest day's work and not have to look at a cell phone all day. I'm not sure. I just think it's kind of a shame, I guess, that she didn't get a headstone of her own, although I'm assuming it was a happy marriage. I don't know anything about their personal lives. I mean, it could have been terrible. Although then, if it was terrible and he left to go to California and came back, would she really have gone back with him? It seems like if they had such a terrible marriage, when he went to California the first time, she would have, well, taken off if she could have. But in those days, a woman and she already had a baby, it wouldn't have been that easy. So yeah, he could have been a drunk abuser. She could have been a drunk abuser. You never know. I'm not saying anything like that runs in my family heritage. We're all fine folk. So I'm sure they had a loving marriage and would have wanted to share a tombstone. This is really cool. I've been in so many old cemeteries just kind of poking around, looking at graves of people who died of influenza or bar fights or eating library paste. Like that guy in Goldfield, Nevada. But I've never actually gone to the graves of any of my ancestors, let alone any graves of my ancestors from the 1800s. My California roots run deep. Sure is a shame I can't afford to live here. Or I guess technically I do live in California, albeit a forgotten, godforsaken corner of it way down in the desert just outside Death Valley, which is the only part of California I can afford to live in. And it certainly doesn't have cemeteries like this. Oh my gosh, if you ever go to the cemetery in the town where I live, it looks nothing like this. No trees, no green grass. Uh-oh, looks like my great-great-grandparents have a new neighbor. Look at that, it's another freshie. Pretty fresh. Look at that, November of 2023. I'm filming this video in January of 2024, so, she just passed away a couple months ago. Aw, welcome to the neighborhood, Lorraine. Lorraine Nancy Hunter, buried with her husband, Brantley. And they're just right across the street from Thomas and Eliza. If I know Eliza, I'll bet you anything, she baked a casserole to welcome them to the neighborhood. Oh gosh, what do I know? I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm just trying to appreciate the absurdity and the wonderfulness of life. The fact that an illiterate tin miner from some tiny little town in Cornwall, England, which I feel like Cornwall is probably like the boondocks of England. I've never been to Cornwall. Gosh, now that I know all this stuff about my family history, I feel like I need to take a trip to Cornwall, or at the very least, I need to go get a Cornish pasty. Oh my God, have you guys ever had a Cornish pasty? It's I guess it stems from the history of Cornwall and all the mining that they did and maybe still do there. I think there is still mining in Cornwall. Anyway, the miners would take their lunch down into the mine with them, and you can't be messing around down in the mine with like, you know, a thermos or like a fork and a knife. You just need something you can grab and go. You don't eat it with your hands. And so they developed this dish called a Cornish pasty or pasty. I think it's pronounced pasty. Looks like pasty, P-A-S-T-Y, but I think it's a pasty. Anyway, it's basically like a kind of like a handheld pot pie, almost like a little calzone. And they would stuff it full of like minced meat, vegetables, potatoes. They're freaking good. Matter of fact, there's a restaurant in Vegas that I used to go to all the time called the Cornish Pasty Company. And my friend Terry is Welsh, okay? My electrician friend Terry. So anytime he would come to visit us, we would go, or come to visit me, I would take him to the Cornish Pasty Company because the Welsh also have a big history of mining, and well, Wales and Cornwall aren't that far apart. And I don't know, Terry loved him some pasties. Matter of fact, I love me some pasties, and I'm getting hungry. I don't know if that's rude to say in front of the dead. I'll bet you anything, Thomas. Well, first of all, I'll bet you anything, Eliza cooked up a mean pasty. Every day when Thomas went down to the mine, she probably, you know, handed him a fresh baked hot pasty wrapped in a handkerchief, and he took it down with him. And then, you know, when they had their lunch break and the whistle rang or whatever, he would sit there in some darkened corner of a mine at it by the flickering light of a carbide lantern. They might not have even had carbide lanterns yet. I don't know. I'll have to ask my friend Ross when that innovation happened. Maybe he just had a candle on his helmet. Maybe he just sat there in the dark eating Eliza's delicious pasty. Well, Thomas, now you can feast on Eliza's delicious pasty for all eternity. She's right there next to you, and she can't get away. None of this, oh, not tonight, I have a headache. Oh my gosh, I hope I'm not completely offending everybody watching this video. You know, I'm just trying to have fun. You know, eat, drink, and be merry. For tomorrow, we may die. And I might as well be merry because it doesn't look like I'm going to eat any pasties. Closest one is in Sacramento, which is 3 hours from here. So unfortunately, that means no pasties for me. And it would have been, actually, all joking aside, cool to have a pasty after visiting the gravestone of my Cornish forebears. Oh gosh, I feel really bad that I didn't bring flowers or anything. I did look around in my car to see if I had anything at all I could leave on their graves. You know, anything suitable. Unfortunately, I didn't really have much. I thought about leaving a packet of my magic beans on the grave, but then I thought, I'll bet you anything, they didn't mess around with that. You know, I was talking about him possibly being an alcoholic, you know, wife beater. I doubt it. I'll bet you anything they were good, God-fearing Christian folk, and they certainly wouldn't have wanted anything to do with magic beans or any kind of beans. So the only other thing I could find that I thought might be nice to leave is this orange. It's a mandarin orange, which has nothing to do with Cornwall. But aren't mandarin oranges from China, which is where Sim Ah, their neighbor in Sierra City, was from? Maybe this will remind them of, you know, their I'm sure in their time out west they met plenty of Chinese folk, although I'm sure back in those days they weren't allowed to, you know, associate. But I'm going to go ahead and leave them this mandarin orange just as a nice bright spot of color. And I'm going to put it right on the corner between Thomas's side and Eliza's side. So that way they can share it. They're probably like, big deal, why don't you bring us a bottle of booze? Gosh, I wish I did have my, I'm not traveling with all my camping gear because like I said, it's too cold to camp. So I don't have my bottle of Jack Daniels that I normally roll with. If I did, I don't know that I would drink any by the graves of my ancestors, but I sure would by the grave of that dude Barry with the Jack Daniels t-shirt. I'll bet he would appreciate it. I've desecrated this cemetery enough with my jibber jabber. I guess it's time get going. I mean, I do have 4 hours to drive back to my mom's house, and I don't want to drive in the dark. But before I leave, I just remembered I have one other thing that I want to leave on the grave of this one, and this one is really for Thomas, not so much Eliza. Okay, the other day I went to the visitor center at the borax mine in the little desert town of Boron, California. If you watched that video, you'll remember I went into the visitor center where you can look into the biggest open pit mine in California, which happens to be a borax mine. And at the visitor center, one of the docents there gave me this little postcard, which has a picture of some giant mining truck and little samples of minerals, I guess, that have boron in them. Well, I thought I would leave this on Thomas's grave because he was a miner. That's not to say that he enjoyed mining, and he might not want a reminder of it left on his grave for all eternity, but I don't know. He spent his life as a miner. I'm interested in mining, and I thought it'd be kind of neat to leave a sample of stuff that they mine down where I live, up here where he's buried. Now remember, he worked, well, presumably he worked in a copper mine in Kennett, because that's what it was known for, but there's gold mines there too. He probably did some gold mining. He probably mined whatever. I mean, he was mining tin back in Cornwall. He would mine whatever he could to make a buck. And so I'm gonna leave this little card right at the foot of his grave. Even though maybe that's like the greatest insult of all, because he did die of a mining related illness. Remember that miner's consumption, aka bronchitis? Well, I'm sure the guys working in the borax mines probably didn't do too much better, but I don't know, I didn't have much in my car, and it is kind of a cool, thoughtful tie-in. So, great-great-grandpa Thomas and great-great-grandma Eliza, I hope you appreciate the gesture. You know, now that I think about it, I'm always going to these military memorials and, you know, taking off my hat and having a moment of silence. I feel like I ought to do that for my great-great-grandparents. So I'm gonna have a moment of silence for these people who probably underwent a significant amount of hardship to come to California and make it so that, well, their son could marry my great-grandma, and then they could have my grandfather. Okay, my grandfather's name was Donald, and he was a character. In fact, he was really into history, archaeology, exploring. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2013, but if he was still alive, he would totally be into my YouTube channel, I'm pretty sure. So anyway, if it wasn't for these guys here coming over, well, Donald maybe wouldn't have even been born, and then I wouldn't have been born. I certainly wouldn't have been lucky enough to have been born in California, the promised land, where I'm free to roam about the country, blabbering to myself and countless others on my cell phone. Okay, let's all have a moment of silence for my great-great-grandfolks. Eliza, Thomas, and hey, why not, Edward, thank you for making my life possible. Oh, hey, I just noticed when I panned over to Edward's grave, looks like he was a Mason. Isn't that the sign of the Freemasons? Oh, how about that? Okay, well, I guess before I leave, I'm going to give my great-great-grandparents a hug. Okay, I know, it's probably kind of weird to hug a tombstone, but what about me isn't weird? Bye! Until next time! And I'm not even kidding. I actually can see myself coming back up here again. Why not? Redding seems like a cool town. I'd like to check it out when it's not so freaking cold sometime. And I don't know, it's just kind of cool to have a grave to go visit and pay your respects at, you know? It's important to remember your roots. I often feel like I'm rootless, you know, just wandering the West, constantly driving around in circles, never feeling like I have a home. Well, at least I can always come back here to this cemetery and remember where I came from.